Sometime in the middle of a thunderstorm that made the mountains look alive, Claire Whitman sprinted across the diner's parking lot with rain hammering her like punishment from the sky. She reached her battered Corolla only to freeze at the sight of a white envelope pinned beneath the wiper like a cruel joke. She already knew what it was. Another final notice, another countdown to losing everything. 3 days until eviction. 3 days until failure swallowed her whole. The storm drowned her tears as she sat behind the wheel trying to breathe past the panic clawing at her chest. But she drove anyway, picked up Lucy from Dolar's warm kitchen, kissed her daughter goodnight, and tried to stay upright inside a life collapsing at the seams. Then her phone rang. A number she didn't know. A voice she didn't recognize. Attorney Harlan Pierce spoke calmly, politely, as though he hadn't just upended her world. Margaret Caldwell, deceased, wealthy, unknown to Claire, had left her a mansion worth $7 million, and a sealed letter addressed to Claire alone. She stood in her silent apartment with the eviction notice on the table and the promise of a mansion in her hands, Lucy breathing softly in the next room. Somewhere between fear and hope, Claire realized her life had cracked open, and something was waiting on the other side. The next morning began with the sharp scent of lemon oil and the hush of old wood as Claire stepped into Harlan Pierce's Victorian law office. Lucy clung to her side while the attorney slid a wax-sealed letter toward her, its oak emblem shimmering like a dare. Margaret Caldwell's handwriting unfurled across the page with unsettling familiarity. She wrote of watching Claire, not stalking her, but studying her resilience, her honesty, her unwillingness to bend even when the world demanded it. This inheritance wasn't about blood, Margaret explained. It was about trust, about danger, about unfinished work. The Caldwell estate, she wrote, held more than wealth. It held locked truths Claire alone could decide to face. When Claire drove through winding mountain roads and saw the towering gates of the estate creak open, she felt both invited and examined. The house stood like a sleeping giant, stone walls wrapped in ivy, windows reflecting secrets instead of sunlight. Elias Monroe, the caretaker, welcomed them with an expression carved by years of loyalty and silence. Inside, the mansion seemed to inhale her presence. Lucy ran through hallways with innocent excitement, but Claire sensed something else, awareness. That night, unable to ignore the pull of the bronze attic key, she climbed the narrow staircase. The attic smelled of cedar and dusted history. A steel safe waited at the center. Shelves brimmed with notebooks, each filled with Margaret's meticulous handwriting, not diaries. Records, observations, evidence. Claire wasn't inheriting a home, she was inheriting a story someone had died to protect. Dawn found Claire surrounded by Margaret's notebooks, each page more damning than the last. Names she'd only heard in passing, Senator Douglas Whitmore, Archer Langdon, Helen Whitmore, appeared in tidy columns beside land schemes, hidden accounts, rigged zoning, offshore transfers, and dates that connected like a conspiracy web. Patterns formed, motives sharpened. A clue inside the attic pointed her back to the safe. Not where we began, but when we began again. Restart, 1997. When she entered that year into the combination lock, the safe opened with a groan like it had been holding its breath for decades. Inside lay bearer bonds, confidential files, photos of late-night meetings between powerful men, audio recordings, and the sealed evidence of a vanished FBI agent who once tried to help Margaret and never surfaced again. Elias admitted Margaret had been hunted, her life threatened more than once. Not paranoia, strategy. When Helen Whitmore invited Claire to her mansion for supper, the warning wrapped itself in polite smiles and expensive perfume. Claire sat across from people who built their power on buried truths, and they wanted her back in the shadows, but she refused. When she returned home, the estate had been breached, the attic safe emptied, every shred of evidence stolen. Fear twisted through her, but defeat didn't. She sought out Raymond Cole, a former agent who'd spent years trying to expose the same network before losing everything. Together, they connected dots Margaret had followed alone. And the deeper they dug, the clearer it became, Claire wasn't just an heir. She was a threat to an empire. A blueprint hidden inside Margaret's files revealed a detail no one should have missed. Beneath the estate lay a sealed chamber marked with a faded cross. Following Margaret's notes, Claire, Cole, and Rose Barrow descended into the depths of the house, prying open a forgotten panel to reveal a stone archway swallowed by shadows. The chapel door groaned open, releasing a breath of air colder than winter. Beyond it stretched catacombs carved long before the Caldwell name existed, tight corridors of stone leading into wider chambers lined with crumbling benches and ancient markings. Words etched into rock whispered warnings. Silence is the true boundary. As they explored, they found a steel vault perfectly modern among the ruins. Inside were evidence lockers filled with decades of medical experiments, psychological conditioning programs, indoctrination tapes, and redacted documents stamped with federal seals. This wasn't corruption, it was engineering. Generations of crafted successors, groomed leaders, manufactured loyalty. And then Claire found the box labeled WITTMAN, photos from her childhood, copies of her school records, her mother's medical history. Surveillance logs tracking her life long before she could walk. She hadn't been chosen by fate. She had been monitored, measured, evaluated. Margaret hadn't saved her out of sentiment. She had chosen her because Claire was strong enough to finish what she started. The catacombs didn't hide a secret. They hid a blueprint, one designed to shape the future. And Claire was holding the match needed to burn it down. The night before the evidence was set to go public, the estate felt like a live wire humming with fate. Claire sent Lucy into hiding with Elias, trusting the only person who had risked his life without hesitation. Cole set up the final encrypted upload, wiring connections through hidden ports and mirrored drives. At 11 a.m., the truth would detonate across the world, but the storm came early. Black SUVs cut through the trees, doors slammed, tactical boots hit the ground. The first flashbang shattered the kitchen window, blasting glass into the hallway. Cole shouted for Claire to hold the stairs. Rose fired from the side corridor, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Claire braced herself at the top of the staircase, pistol tight in her grip. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat counted. Shots split the air. Walls splintered. The house shook under the weight of violence it had been built to keep quiet. Claire ducked behind the banister, firing back with controlled fury. She wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting to finish the story Margaret began. In the study, Cole yelled that the router was hit, then rerouted the connection through the grandfather clock's hidden port. The upload bar crawled forward agonizingly slow. 40%, 70, 98. A bullet grazed Claire's shoulder, forcing her to grit through pain as footsteps thundered closer. Then green. Upload complete. Sirens echoed from beyond the gate, too late to stop the truth, but just in time to witness the empire collapse. Claire fell to her knees, breath shaking, smoke burning her throat. But she had done it, and the darkness finally had a name. By sunset, the Caldwell estate was a battlefield littered with broken glass, bullet casings, and evidence boxes scattered like the bones of a story finally exhumed. Reporters swarmed the gates, helicopters hovered above, and the Caldwell files spread across the world with relentless speed. Senators resigned. CEOs vanished. Investigators opened sealed cases. And for the first time, the powerful trembled. Claire didn't watch the coverage. She sat beneath the orchard tree with Lucy curled against her chest, breathing the relief she had never dared imagine. Cole turned the barn into an archive, uploading files into mirrored global servers, building a fortress out of truth rather than stone. Rose reached out to families silenced for decades, offering them names, dates, justice. Elias stood at the porch, exhausted but alive, guarding Claire with the stubborn loyalty of a man who had already lost too much. When the world's noise quieted, Claire descended alone into the catacombs with a lantern in hand. She sat in the chamber where her file once lay and pressed record on the small device Cole left for her. She spoke of the lie built into her childhood, the weight of inherited silence, and the cost of choosing truth over fear. She didn't speak for sympathy, she spoke to leave a trail, a reminder, a warning. When she finished, she buried the recorder beneath the oldest tree on the property, not to hide it, but to let it wait for whoever needed it next. Because truth didn't die, it waited. In the days that followed, the country trembled. The Caldwell files cracked open a vault no one knew existed, exposing decades of coercion, hidden conditioning programs, land theft, and political grooming. Claire watched it all unfold from the background, refusing interviews, refusing to become a headline. Instead, she rebuilt. The West Wing became a refuge for whistleblowers and survivors. Journalists came not for spectacle, but for clarity. Cole fortified the estate with new security systems, turning it into a sanctuary instead of a prison. Rose connected scattered victims, piecing together lives once buried under fear. Lucy's drawings shifted from monsters to trees, from dark scribbles to bright colors. One morning, Cole stood beside Claire beneath the orchard branches. He told her she hadn't just exposed corruption, she had changed the rules. Claire didn't argue. The truth didn't need volume, it needed steadiness. That evening, she walked the property as the sun dipped below the mountains, the estate's long shadow stretching behind her. But for the first time, the shadow didn't feel heavy. It felt like history being rewritten. She wasn't the heir. She wasn't the pawn. She wasn't the Queen Margaret imagined she'd be. She was something far more dangerous, someone who refused to follow the script carved for her long before she was born. The final night settled softly over the Caldwell estate, washing the shattered windows and cracked walls in the quiet glow of recovery. Claire stood on the ridge overlooking the mountains, the chill brushing her face, the stars returning after weeks of storms. Behind her, the estate pulsed with new life, voices, safety, truth humming where silence once ruled. Lucy laughed somewhere near the orchard. Elias called her back into the light. Cole hammered wooden beams into the west wing, turning ruin into shelter. Rose prepared documents for families ready to reclaim their names. Claire held the last photo Margaret left her, Claire as a child, standing beside the woman she never remembered meeting, both smiling in sunlight. On the back, Margaret had written, "You were never the heir. You were the undoing." For a long moment, Claire let the words settle like dust finally choosing where to land. She whispered into the wind, not with anger, but with certainty, that history wasn't what people were taught. It was what survived long enough to be believed. And she had survived. The truth had survived. The next chapter wasn't about burning down the past anymore. It was about building something better in its place. She turned toward the house, toward Lucy, toward a future that finally felt like her own. And to you listening right now, thank you for walking with her through every shadow, every secret, every revelation. If this story moved you, give it a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so more stories like this can find the people who need them. Where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now?